Welcome to my lecture. Today we're going to learn Ajax and JSON in web technologies. First, let's take a look at the outline of this lecture. In section 1, we're going to review JSP, Java Server Page. In section 2, we're going to talk about the importance of decouple front-end and back-end. In section 3, we're going to have a detailed discussion of Ajax. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's a collection of technologies. Section 4, we're going to talk about JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, which is a data format. In section 5, we're going to talk about how to convert JSON to Java object using Jackson, and vice versa, convert Java object to JSON. In section 6, we're going to learn how to convert JSON to JavaScript object, and vice versa. In the last section, I'm going to introduce a JSON placeholder API. It's a free API that can provide fake JSON data whenever you need. Okay, without further ado, let's start section 1, JSP, server-side rendering of HTML. Up until now, I hope every student can understand that in a web application, most of the HTML pages shown to the clients are not stored in a static form, but are dynamically generated as the result of a HTTP request. For example, if the client requests to see all the users we store in database, the user will make a request to a servlet, and servlet will talk to database, retrieve all the data, and prepare an HTML page and send this page as a response to browser, as you can see this picture here. This is the example in JSP demo project. If you forget this project, take a look at JSP demo project. Step 1, make a request to user servlet 4. Tomcat parse the request, find a servlet with this matching URL. Then this servlet does all the work. Talk to database, save data in request, and forwards to users.jsp. And if you still remember how Tomcat converts JSP, is Tomcat converts JSP to a .java file. And then JVM will compile this .java file to .class bytecode file. JVM can execute this code. Now in step 6, this .class file can provide the HTML content. A complete HTML content will be sent back to the browser as the response payload. As you can see in step 7, the response body has the entire HTML documentation. So let me show you the demo in Google Chrome. I have already launched this project in IntelliJ IDEA, so I simply just go to Chrome. As a client, I'm going to make a request to localhost 8080 JSP demo user servlet 4. So when I press enter, before that, let me press F12 so you can see the traffic. When I press enter, we're making a request, user servlet 4 request, and we're getting a response, and the response has a complete HTML page. So if we click user servlet 4 and we click response, as you can see, the response payload has a complete HTML. Here is HTML, here is head, and here is div. If you scroll down, you can see this is the table, and a table header, the first row that has the first user, second row, and so on and so forth. In this case, we request 50 users, so there will be 50 rows in here. The takeaway point here is every time you request a servlet, the servlet will prepare the data and send the data to a JSP, and JSP will output an entire HTML documentation and send it back to the browser. JSP is a collection of technologies that helps software developers create dynamically generated web pages. So I want every student to understand that JSP is a server-side technology. So all the HTML pages are prepared on the server side in Tomcat. So what the client side, the browser, receives from the server is just a static, complete HTML pages. Now let me talk about some shortcomings in this server-side rendering of HTML. Number one, for every user interaction, user action, or user click on this web page, it needs to do a page refresh or full page reload. Why? Because if you remember this picture, every time we make a request, we're requesting a servlet, and the servlet prepares the data and passes the data to JSP, and JSP will compile and generate a brand new HTML and send it back to us. That means every time we have a user interaction on the page, we're getting a brand new page from the server, and our browser is rendering it. And that is some bad user experience. Okay, so for example, I have already launched my application called Expense Tracker. So it's an application that keeps track of your financial activities. And this is JSP based. This is a user click. If I click Show All Activities, Expense Tracker servlet is going to talk to real database, get all my activities, put in JSP, and JSP becomes HTML, and we send this entire HTML back to this page. So if I click, now pay attention to the left side of this type. So if I click Show All Activities, it's loading, and we have all the activities. If I click Select All Request, in the response, you can see we're getting this entire HTML page. Okay. Next, if I'm going to click this Delete, pay attention to this small icon here. If I click Delete, it refreshes. This entire page refreshes. This one line is gone. All I want to change is this one line. However, when I click Delete, database deletes and the servlet retrieves everything, and it creates a new page and sends it back to me. So if I click this Delete ID equal to 2, and I go to response, I got an entire HTML page again. And the difference between this page and the previous page, I mean the page before I delete ID equal to 2, is that we have one less row. However, if I delete one row, I have to reload the entire page to show you the difference. Also, if I click Edit, now pay attention to this icon here. If I click Edit, I have to refresh because this is the new page. If I go back, that's a refresh. If I'm trying to add a new activity, that's a new page. When I add this new activity, then it will lead me back to the activities page, but that's also a new fresh. So this is not a good user experience. Number 2, it is a waste of bandwidth. Think about this. When the front end is making a request to the back end, all the front end wants is just the data. However, in this case, the servlet is sending the entire HTML page. It has all the tags like A tag, P tag, HTML tag, div, and all of those. So it's really a waste of bandwidth. Number 3, using server-side rendering of HTML add additional load on server, because now the responsibility of server is parse the request, talk to database, process some request or doing some calculation, and then prepare HTML. So all of those become the responsibility of the server. The front end is kind of lightweight because everything the front end is doing is rendering the page we got from the back end, right? So in this case, we're adding additional load on the server. We should really want the server simply just focus on talking to database and processing the request, doing some business logic. Last but not least is, as a front-end engineer, now besides HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you also need to learn JSP. And technically speaking, JSP is a backend or server-side technology. So it's not very designer, front-end engineer friendly. So those are the shortcomings of using JSP or any server-side rendering of HTML. For example, ASP is also belongs to the same category.